Okay, welcome. Hi, welcome to How to Convert Inquiries into New Patients. I'm Stuart Gandolf. I am looking forward to working with you today. I'm going to go to the next screen. So for those of you who have not attended our webinar or don't know of our firm, I'm Stuart. I'm CEO of Healthcare Success. We are an agency that works obviously in the healthcare, or probably obviously work in the healthcare space. I'm joined today, this is going to be a fun one for me, by a colleague that I've worked with for decades, though neither of us look like it, of course. So, Kathy, do you want to introduce yourself and kind of a quick version of your experience before we jump into the meat of this?
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. I'm happy to be here today. Kathy Gorin. I have been working, as Stuart said, we've both been in the healthcare space in strategic planning and working in application of campaigns and all sorts of things over the years with Stuart for several decades. So we've seen a lot of practices struggle with phone conversions, and we thought it was really important to just share our experiences and provide some assistance in a very changing landscape right now. So we're excited to talk about our experiences and share some tools.
So, and that's actually a good note to talk about. So, this particular meeting is about converting inquiries into patients in most cases. So, this applies to hospital systems, health systems, multi-location practices, as Kathy referred to. Smaller businesses can take some good stuff away from this as well. Also, other forms of retail businesses. So, it's not as applicable to um, specialties that aren't working with consumers. This is definitely a B2C issue we're talking about today. So we have a lot of B2B clients. Today is really B2C focused. And how do you handle inquiries to your business from the consumer side? And so we're going to talk today. Oh, a couple other things in housekeeping. Always have to remember, because the most common question is always, will there be a recording in case I have colleagues I want to share this with, or if I have to leave early? The answer is yes. We do provide a recording of this meeting to participants and people who registered. It'll also be on our website for a period of time, so you can get the recording of the material. We will have some time for Q&A at the end. So if you go ahead and add into the questions, if you have questions, we'll try to address them. Typically, we do that at the end just to keep our flow going. Although, Kathy, tell you what, you can, if you like, if you kind of monitor that as it comes along, if there's something you think is timely, feel free to interrupt me. Oh, by the way, yeah, I mentioned, Kathy and I've worked for decades, so she's kind of like my sister. So if we step on each other, it's okay. We're not being rude to each other. We're just used to, and we both like to talk a lot. So I'll be leading today, and then I've asked Kathy to speak to some color commentary as well. Kathy, I often tell people I've worked with over 1,000 clients over the years, and Kathy's worked with thousands. So she's actually worked on the ground level with our clients more than I have. So she has a wealth of knowledge on this. And so I'm leading today just for the sake of organization and time. But Kathy has mad intense experience on this, and a lot of real world experiences she can bring to bear. So Kathy will ask for your comments along the way. And that's what the format looks like today. So jumping into it, just before we go any further, again, we're speaking today from experience. Our company's been around for almost 20 years now, 18 years. And before that, Kathy and I did this for another firm. So we're pretty experienced at this. The agency we work with we're not a training or consulting agency. We're truly a integrated marketing agency. And so each of our specialties include things like branding strategy, creative, paid search, paid social, SEO, programmatic advertising, development, all these different things. We've spent 18 years building the best team we've ever had. And we talk about a lot that in the world of marketing, it's just like in healthcare, there are specialists. And so our team, the way our business model works is all about having specialists at every single position. Not easy to do. It took us a long time, but we're here. So one of the specialties that is sort of unrecognized is, how do we answer the phones? And in the old days, we used to actually have a staff of trainers because it's such an important issue. These days, we don't really have employees that do this, but we have relationships with people we've worked with for many years. So if you're interested in, executing on this, and we're going to give you all the big picture stuff today. If you're interested in executing some of these strategies and either need a referral or need to work with us through some of our team, that's available to you. But today, we're going to give you the most important stuff all free today on this webinar. So, and it's not clicking. There we go. So this going back to what I said a moment ago, I think this is one of the key blogs that we've written in recent years. So the concept here is that there are really only four categories, especially when you start thinking about online marketing, but this concept applies to other endeavors. If you think about it and you break this down, let's talk about pay-per-click just for and paid search just for the sake of argument. The first category that impacts the results of paid search is what's the consumer demand? Do people know they should be searching, right? That has to be there. What's interesting about consumer demand is it's largely fixed. You can increase demand through push advertising, but consumer demand, we can pretty obvious if you just think about this, is a pretty critical function of like a paid search campaign. And so that really matters a lot. Equally matters to that is how is the campaign managed? In other words, you know, the Google ads, who's managing that campaign, what is the bidding strategy, what's the geography, time of day, all the technical things that make a Google ads campaign work. That matters. The next thing that matters is the landing page you drive them to. It's absolutely vital. And so, you know, it's not just enough to get them to, there has to be demand, they have to click, and then they have to, you know, fall in love with your landing page enough to inquire. So the landing page matters. And then finally, the conversion process we're talking about today matters. But here's the key insight I want you to have. This is really important if you're new to us. Each one of those boxes is equally important. So in other words, if let's say consumer demand is zero, out the back end, the results are zero. And the thing here is each of these components is multiplicative, not additive, meaning that a zero, you can't, everything else adds up still to zero. It's not like you add 0 plus 5 plus 5 plus 5. 0 times 5 times 5 times 5 is all still zero. So if you increase your effectiveness, for example, on your Google campaign management by 20%, immediately you're going to see a 20% increase on the back end of results. If you're able to increase your landing page conversions by double, you just double the results of your campaign. So, and here's the last thing. If you're able to, let's say you're spending a lot on, when the lot's relative, of course, but a lot on, you know, managing and landing and, you know, building your marketing campaign. If your conversion process is zero, everything you just did is still a zero. So the biggest failure that we see with marketing campaigns is not sections 1, 2, or 3, it's with number 4. So today, this is a very unheralded topic, not a sexy topic like when we talk about SEO or paid search or conversion rate optimization, whatever. But without that key puzzle piece, everything else you're doing is a waste of time. It's really vital. So of all the webinars we've done, even though this isn't the sexiest topic we have, it's absolutely one of the most important topics we're covering in our series. So before we jump into the hows and whys, I want to talk a little bit with Kathy. And Kathy and I have noticed this. It was hard pre-COVID, but people are different post-COVID. Their expectations, you know, I was talking last night, I saw an old friend I haven't seen since before COVID, and we're talking about, wow, the world sure has changed. And, you know, like how people are literally different since before COVID. And there's data to support that. That's not the point of today's webinar, but we're going to cover some of the key factors to keep in mind. So I think a lot of these trends were in place pre-COVID, but they are now just vastly accelerated. It was a accelerant, COVID, to making these things happen. So we've talked about this in other webinars, but you know, again, just as a reminder, consumers are not just, or patients are no longer just patients, they're consumers. They listen to their doctor's advice, but they will, excuse me, they will make their own decisions. Thank you very much. Today's consumers are digitally empowered and enabled. They have higher expectations. You know, they used to put up with the fact they can't get into your office. That's not the case anymore. They'll just find somebody else. Convenience at all stages of that patient journey is just paramount. They're far less loyal. Disruptors love when traditional providers fail at this because they just rush in to fill the void. They're counting on traditional providers to screw this up because that's why they exist, right? So that's why even though CVS and Walgreens, those guys were taking over the world a couple of years ago, they're struggling a little now. Still, there's thousands of them, right? They're not going away. So, you know, these disruptors rushed in to fill the voids and to give consumers a convenient experience. And survey after survey, a common theme emerges when we look at it. It's like, wait, I'm a customer here. I'm not just a piece of your puzzle here. I'm a customer. I'm not just a patient. So I want you to keep that in mind as we talk about this topic. Another
One of
thing
the
is,
I wanted to
go
add to
ahead,
that
Kathy.
last slide is just thinking about the last time you had to make a decision for a new service provider. What resources do you use? Who do you talk to? And what your thought process is during that journey? Because this is new to them, and they're just using the resources they have. So it's just critical that we make that accessibility easy and our differentiation, clear upon connection. So go ahead, sir.
Makes sense. So today, another thing that, in the olden days, we talked solely about phone inquiries, but of course today there's lots of ways consumers can engage with you. And so breaking this down simplistically, phone inquiries still matter. There's still a lot of them. Online inquiries, with our campaigns that we do, those top three can be pretty well distributed. Phone inquiries and online inquiries are oftentimes the way people engage with a business online. When new patients can schedule an appointment online, let's talk about this in a moment. They prefer that. It's actually a really important topic that we can drill down on another day in more detail. And then the final category is a patient portal. And my advice quickly is, please, please, please don't send a new patient to your existing patient portal. Your patient portal is far too complicated and not really meant for this. So you have to find a way to handle new patient appointment scheduling or inquiries or phone. And there's technology behind all of this. There's lots of different options. I wish I could give you one singular solution. We work with clients that have many different ones. So as part of as an agency, we work with them. We can share advice when people ask us, but at the end of the day, that's a more complex decision. And which phone system should I use or which tools should I use? Most of our clients, definitely, we talk about phones, we talk about online forms and new patient online scheduling. We recommend whenever we can get it, online appointment scheduling. So when that happens, a lot of this we're talking about today is moot and the consumers prefer it. However, one of the jokes that Kathy's heard me say this for years, if you ask patients, what are the things that, how do patients want to interact with their medical providers? And the answer, the two things that I hear most often from consumers is, well, I want to be able to schedule my own appointment and I want to be able to communicate with my doctor. And what are two things that providers have steadfastly either refused to offer or resisted offering, allowing them to communicate with the doctor and allowing them to set appointments on their own? Now that's changing, it's evolving. Certainly through EMRs, existing patients can communicate with their doctor now, and that's just become more standard. But man, did providers resist that. But still, online patient appointment scheduling, and I get all the reasons why that's complicated, but if you ask the consumer what they want online patient appointment scheduling. So keep that in mind. So setting up the problem, why are we talking about this? Well, because it's a huge problem and it hasn't gone away and it's not any better. So this a couple slides here from my friend Rob Klein. You may have seen Rob speak with me on multiple different venues with podcasts, webinars, or whatever. Rob's an awesome researcher. He's a brand researcher. And so this is from one of his recent studies. And so and just using primary care as an example, on these matrices here, we have importance and then satisfaction. And look at the red over there, highly important to patients and highly dissatisfied. Oh, what is that? Online and phone appointment scheduling, check-in, waiting room, exam room waits, nurse professionalism. But the one that's the very worst is the topic of today's webinar. So if you thought this might be a little problem, well, if you look at the consumers, they're telling you that appointment scheduling is the biggest, highest importance and least satisfaction combination. So that I hope I have your attention, right? This is a big deal, and we're just getting started. Secondly, Rob, this again goes back to Rob. Shout out Rob for this great research. This is a journey, and Rob did a great job of pulling together different data, different surveys, and reviewing satisfaction along the path. And you can see here is red would be a primary opportunity, highly importance, but lower satisfaction. Where is the red on this particular scale? Oh, it's phone answered, no voicemail. Physician returns call when agreed upon, attitude of staff member, phone answered by live person, phone answered, no voicemail. You can see that the satisfaction on this is all the scheduling, the phone calls, the arriving. These critical first impressions are where the most dissatisfaction is. So pretty amazing, right? Like this is common throughout healthcare. And looking at it another way, if you're good at this, this can actually be a competitive advantage because people are so unhappy with the status quo that it can be a competitive advantage just to do a decent job at this. Switching gears, this is from Press Ganey. We pulled together sources from a variety of different stats today. This is a Press Ganey slide. So they were talking about here is patients evaluating doctors and clinics based upon patient experience. Oh, I should mention this. Clinical care and quality is presumed. That's table stakes. If you don't have that, you're dead. You're completely dead. But even if you have great clinical care, these things are what people can evaluate, right? Patients can't evaluate what's a great gastroenterologist, but they can certainly evaluate how they're being treated. And so, a gastroenterologist will tell you, well, they shouldn't care about that. It doesn't matter. Well, that's, shouting at the ocean. The patients do care. So, again, these are things where that matter to patients: quality of customer service, communication, ease of appointment booking. You can see all three of those things are among the very most important things to patients. And then
certainly correctly are a reason they'll refer. So these are things they'll talk about. If they have good experiences in these categories, the pendulum swings back the other direction. That will cause them to become ambassadors.
Yep. And then 2/3 of people essentially say they prefer scheduling an appointment online versus over the phone. So even though we're going to talk a lot today about phones and online form fills, keep in mind that most people want to do that. So if you want to skip over some of what we're talking about today, get online, a good online conversion system. Again, I recognize that's not always easy or possible, but that's what consumers want. Another survey by Press Ganey. This is a great question. After searching for a healthcare provider online, what would discourage you? Oh, number one, difficulty contacting the office. It's like this theme is over and over and over again. The number one thing, 2/3 of the time, that initial experience, they're telling you they'll bounce, right? The data is here. So what's going on? Why is this so bad? Well, this is some data that we collected years ago. It's still relevant today. Our trainers went back and just kind of evaluated like 1,000 phone calls and sort of scored calls and compared to where they should be at these kind of critical factors. So information gathering calls were below standard almost 100% of the time. Most of the time, they did not offer an appointment. Taking control of the call, most of the time that didn't happen. They provided too much info, happened a lot, and most didn't even have a decent greeting. So, this is calls, the research that we've done in the past. You can just see the research we just showed you. This just continues to be an ongoing issue. So, again, why are these things happening? Well, this is a customer experience. They get long holds. They can be forgotten. You ever have that? Isn't it great when that happens? You wait on hold for a long time. This has had to have happened to you personally, right? And my wife downstairs will shout sometimes when this happens to her. It's pretty frequent. Busy signals happen still. Nobody answers at all. Voicemails that never get returned. A lot of times that, if you're telling the provider level, you get some very nice, very helpful people, but they're confused. They don't really know what they're to do. So they're very polite. They just can't really help you. Sometimes they're rude. And a lot of times you can kind of just feel this is a very harried environment. So if you're too busy for me on the phone, how's it going to be when I show up in your office? And people are looking for clues when they do this about how they'll be treated. Another thing we see a lot is the people answering the phone may think, oh, well, especially if they start answering a lot of calls, like, oh, these new patient inquiries aren't any good. Unless they're being referred by their friends or their doctor, these are just terrible patients. And we see that on average, at least if we break it down, about 50% of patients that call into a business aren't being converted. And it's in a shocking amount of the time, most of the time, unless the patient volunteers it, they're not even asked to schedule an appointment. Now, I want to point out here too, I'll talk about this in a moment. These concepts we're talking about today apply at the ground level, and there still may be some of you that have answering your own phone on an office by office level, but it also applies to call centers, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. So This is just an important insight. One of the takeaways I hope you leave with today, that when you're working, if your team is used to only working with doctor referrals or patient referrals, those are easy. Those are layups. Those are really, really simple because there's an implied level of trust there. But the moment somebody calls you cold from an ad or from on the internet, there is no implied trust. That doesn't mean these are bad people. That doesn't mean that they think you're a bad provider for having to advertise. It just means there's no established trust to lean on. So they're far more difficult. Kathy, you're smiling. Do you want to share a quick anecdote here or a comment?
Yeah, it's just some of the calls that we've heard. We've done a lot of mystery calls over the years, and it's just so critical that you have the right people in these positions that understand your campaigns, they know what's going on, so they can be in alignment with the messaging and the offers, potential offers, or scheduling. So we've heard some pretty crazy stories from our mystery calls. There was one big group I called, a big group of OB-GYNs in Arizona, and they didn't think that they needed help on their phones. And one of the questions I asked was, is he good? Is one of the doctors good? And the girl said, I don't know, he's not my doctor. So we hear some crazy stuff. And you need to keep in mind that we're going to get to that slide later, but that's the first touch point these prospects have with your business. And it starts to shape their brand, how they feel during that process, how easy you are to communicate with. So all these things are starting to shape how they feel about you, what they say, what they post on reviews. So it's a really important turning point. And these callers don't know you at all if they've responded to your advertising. So just really important to be stating your unique value proposition and listening to them so we can provide a solution to their specific problem. But they're harder to convert for sure. That's what I was just laughing at, Stuart.
So I would say here another insight to take away, that when you your doctors may be very proud of the fact it takes a month to get in to see them. If that's the case, you will miss these calls. They will bounce in a heartbeat. So when again, people will put up with a lot if they're being referred by a trusted friend or trusted doctor. But if they're coming to you, as so many do today, direct, they will bounce. So I have here in the slide, I chose to put less than 3 days or less maximum time to get them in when they call. And thinking about that, I really should have said 2. I mean, it has to be really, really fast. Like ideally you can get them in the same day because it's just too easy to call the next person. So this little thing here kills so many campaigns. We will launch a campaign, we talk to them, they tell us they have this all together. We call back. Oh, by the way, our team actually listens to real calls. So we don't listen to every call that we generate for our clients. But we do periodically actually sample the calls, unless we have all the HIPAA stuff in place, don't worry, to sample the calls and hear what's actually happened. And we'll get on the call and they tell us they all have it right, get on the call and they're asking patients to schedule in a month and like not one converts and then they're mad at us. Like, that's not it.
One thing too, Stuart, is if they don't know enough about you, and that's going to be this crowd, they're going to shop you based on price and location. And that's not how they should be choosing a healthcare provider. And it's not how we want them choosing us. So it's important that your unique value proposition, why they should choose you, should be part of that dialogue.
So think about like all this money you spent to generate the lead, all this money you spent to build your brand. Their first experience is terrible and doesn't result in a patient is really a fail, right? It's just a fail. So, I talked about what's happening. So why, in terms of what are the obstacles? Well, first of all, this category is not the sexiest category. It's not our best attended webinar. We have others that do generate a lot more inquiries. But so it's so unheralded, so unsexy. So people tend to really just sort of ignore it. And so that means they're handling this part of their business with zero strategy, really zero thought, zero serious thought. Typically, there's poor systems or no systems to handle patients. No one's accountable, insufficient training. They hire really friendly but ineffective people. Very, very common. Or, effective but not very friendly people. So that's another problem. Kathy's going to speak to the cultural shift in just a moment, generationally. A lot of times on the smaller level, there are still some multi-location businesses we work with that send all the inquiries to each individual's office. And so when we see that kind of thing, typically it's like okay, fill out this paperwork, enter this data in the computer, file over here. Oh, and by the way, order pizza for the office party. So they have too many competing tasks. So that doesn't not so much of a problem in the call center, but for sure on the local level, if you're doing it that way. And then, Kathy, I'd love you to expand on some of this too. Like, we've heard patients, a lot of times the staff is trying to educate the patient on their healthcare over the phone. Sometimes they get lost answering complex insurance questions they don't really have the answers for. And oh my gosh, we hear people diagnose patients over the phone a lot. Kathy, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, actually, one of the things I see, particularly in hospitals or larger systems, is a qualified clinician ends up sort of rolling downhill into that phone position. Also not qualified, doesn't really want to be there. So you want to look for those pitfalls because, again, it's that first impression. And Stuart's talking about the phones, people don't think are that big of a deal. And I was talking to a large multi-location group yesterday just about the very basic rudimentary asking for referrals. And some of these human connection strategies and tactics have sort of fallen off the table, particularly after COVID, because we've gotten into so much online exchange of communication. And people like that human exchange. So if we find ways, opportunities, times to make that happen, people typically buy people and get comfortable with individual relationships. When they're buying you, they're buying a service, a relationship, not just a transactional product, although they might think that. So it's also establishing yourself as a long-term healthcare partner. That all starts with that first phone call and how they feel.
Very good. So, okay, we talked about, excuse me, getting over a cold. Thank you, Scotland, from a couple weeks ago.
Stuart, we have a question. Is this particular specialties or all MD appointments in the 3 days or less? So 3 days or less, is that really across the board?
So ideally it's everybody. Now there can be something like my wife had some obscure endocrine thing, so she had to wait for an endocrinologist, and this was still doctor referred, and it was just brutal. So broadly speaking, though, anybody, it's like the more you can get your leadership team, your doctors, everybody on board looking at your business like a business, the better it'll be. So if you've got somebody like some obscure, specialty or subspecialty, then, it may have to be, but it just isn't ideal. And if they have these huge, so what you could do though is, always build, for example, a strategy there could be if you just have such limited availability, always leave a little bit of extra time in the schedule for new patient inquiries and then fit everybody else around it. Because with repeat patients, you can schedule those a little bit easier. It's the new patients, you only get to be new once. So I would just say work very, very hard at that.
And then another comment on that, Stuart, for behavioral health, mental health, and addiction should be same day if possible for obvious reasons. So those are a much quicker turnaround. We don't want to leave those patients out there looking for care. And often that can involve an influencer. So that's something else to consider when you've got residential, skilled nursing, addiction, mental health, primary, residential. You'll often have an influencer involved in that conversation. So just be aware of what role that individual plays financially, emotionally, so you can involve them in that decision as well.
That's a great point, Kathy. We do a lot in the field of addiction with some very big businesses that in that field. And this role, just as a quick aside, this matters in every single business we work with, but in a field like anything where it's elective and the dollars are big, so, addiction, bariatric surgery, plastic surgery, this becomes that much more important. And also the follow-up becomes that much more important. And with addiction is a specialized, unique industry because, a lot of times the caller doesn't want to come in at all anyway. Give me an excuse not to come in. And if it's the family member, they're panicking, usually with good reason, they want to come in right away. And oh, by the way, there's other providers in addiction, if you didn't notice, right? There's other people that can see them faster.
But that's also considered across all the specialties, though. While we're on this topic, we had a meeting yesterday with one of our internal team members with a big dental group talking about how he'd rather do anything than go to the dentist. So when people are buying healthcare, they'd really rather be doing just about anything else with their time and their money. We don't typically see people really excited to go to the doctor for any reason, even in plastic surgery OBGYN for deliveries is always an exciting time, but there's always a level of stress and fear when they're reaching out to a healthcare provider. So it's up to us to be accommodating and feel like we're the only choice that they should make when that call happens.
And by the way, Kathy, thank you for reading the questions. That really helps me because I can stay focused. So feel free to interrupt me as questions come in relevant. That's really great. Because otherwise I'll miss them. I won't see them to the end.
Gotcha.
So, all right. So the next thing is, okay, so what is this costing us? Forget, the fact that we just, hurt our brand and wasted money. Like, what does this mean really economically in a way, tangible way? So there's a couple ways of looking at this. So taking, now, if you're small, this may sound like lots of money, but this is, pretty sort of common. We say we have a multi-location business is investing $50,000 a month on a given strategy or tactic to support its offices. And if its team fails to convert 25%, well, you could do some easy math. 600,000 divided by 4 is $150,000 wasted advertising budget, not to mention all those new patients. But that's chump change, sadly. That's nothing compared to what you're really missing. So let's talk about that for a moment. So let's take, another example, again, multi-location business. Let's say that this multi-location business still has, this is very common, they still allow the new patient inquiries to go to each individual office. And let's say they're average at best of each of those offices. And let's say they only lose one prospective patient a day, which for busy offices isn't very much, right? To lose a patient a day. So each patient, so 20 patients times per, so a patient per day times 250 business days a year. If the patient value, lifetime value is 5,000, you do the math and oopsie, it's a $25 million recurring loss each year, right? I think most businesses of any size would really like to have an extra $25 million. So this is a problem at the individual offices for smaller businesses, but it's an insane problem for larger institutional businesses. And so, there are times when people don't want to pay, $20,000 for a training program. It's like, oh, I don't know, ROI wise, I might want to look at this or whatever. So there's a huge opportunity cost for not doing this well. And, again, we're talking today about just the bigger picture, but just keep in mind, this is an extremely expensive problem, and you may not even know you have this problem. And it's just a simple one patient per day per office. That's how much money it would cost. So time to adopt a new mindset. I hope we'll agree, right? And I certainly hope I have your attention by now. Kathy talks about this metaphor a lot. So Kathy, you're on mute, Kathy.
Got that. Sorry about that. So I discuss this a lot. This, as I said in my last couple slides, this is their first impression of the business. It's their first impression of how you're going to be treating them. So we can build campaigns and strategies that drive leads and create interest, but it really comes down to this interface, whether or not we book the call, if they are scheduling on a phone call. So it's really important that they're set up to win. Sometimes we've got medical groups that have their phone staff in the front office where patients are coming to be checked in. Sometimes they're in a call center. So it's just really critical that they're set up in a situation where they can win and they understand how important their role is to the overall health of the business. They're the backbone of these marketing campaigns. So it's really important that they understand that they take that role passionately and are geared up and ready to help you convert the calls that are coming in from your efforts.
Yep. So everything, it all starts with that same call. And we'll talk about this theme again in just a moment, but just to keep in mind, there's nothing more important going on than handling those new patient inquiries. So I would also say, as you think about training your team and as you get your reminder on this topic, is to just remember that patients, when they're inquiring, they're ready to buy. So they've recognized the need, they've done research, they've called you, they don't know what to ask. They are judging you based upon what happens. And they have other things they want to talk about. So you have to recognize that this is really important. You just have to figure out how to communicate with patients. But please, when your team tells you these are all a bunch of, crappy callers calling you, you need to do a little more homework to see what exactly is going on. I mentioned a moment ago, we mystery shop clients, or like prospective clients, typically, they call us. And Kathy, remind me to bring that up. We could do that for a limited number of people after the call. So sometimes the prospective client will mystery shop them. Kathy or somebody on our team will call and act like they're a patient, just to get them back with feedback. But we prefer, and these days is a lot more common to listen to actual recordings. So we handle all the privacy stuff, and we typically record every inquiry our firm generates. So we can actually listen to real calls and provide real feedback and oftentimes written reports on how things are going, really. It's funny, just as an aside, I remember one time I was working with a client who was new to our program. I happened to fly out and meet with him as a CEO. I played the first two calls and he put his head in his hands and then he said, "Stop, I can't take it anymore." So I'll never forget that. So it's just really important to find out what's actually happening on those phones. Recording is better. So um, a couple other comments on this before we transition here. Remember the empathy of this. What somebody's calling about could be terrifying to that patient. It's like, "Oh, you're worried you have MS?" Yes, right. I mean, it can be absolutely terrifying, or cancer, or whatever. So it needs to be empathy, and even if it's routine to your team, they have to have that empathy constantly, forever, and they need to be judged on that. So true empathy, active listening skills. This isn't caller number 46 of your very busy day. This is a real person in the line who trusted you enough to call you. And it is the first impression, and that is like one of the most important things to shape that brand perception. So it's really, really, really important. All right, so we talked about the problem. We've talked about consumers. One thing that I want to talk about briefly is responding to consumers. So ideally, you take that call immediately and you jump on it and you hear it live and you handle the issue and you book them on the appointment. However, we may know that, first of all, with our clients that aren't doing online patient scheduling, about half the inquiries we get on average are online forms. So they don't call the office. Today, people love to send emails or through a form properly to inquire. So somebody has to follow up on that form, or horribly, if you miss that opening call, you need to follow up. So if you're following up, or you can't resolve something, you need to get back to them. You need to get back to them right away. So it turns out there's data on this. So the best data comes from people who are on. It's a kind of a corollary. Online businesses that make their living off of nothing but inbound inquiries off the internet. So the data isn't relevant to, or isn't specific to just doctors' offices or multi-location businesses or hospitals, but the data is intriguing. The case is compelling, and this is 100% consistent with my experience. So when this has been studied, the sources are here. This is InsideSales.com. There's another company called Vendasta.com. You can look it up. But this has been studied over like thousands or hundreds of thousands of calls. The chances of reaching somebody, if like they leave a message or if they fill out a form, decreases by a factor of 8 after 5 minutes. That's not 8%. That's a multiple of 8. That's astounding. The odds of receiving. So again, this comes from e-commerce where people are looking for insurance quotes or I don't know, low-end websites or whatever, but it applies to healthcare. So even if it's only 2 times decrease after 5 minutes, it's huge. And for sure, in your own experience, I can tell you that I'm sure you've had experiences where you try somebody, they don't pick up, you go on to the next person in seconds. It's just too easy. So there's a tremendous drop off within 5 minutes. Within our own company, I'm constantly reminding our team to, that's the goal, 5 minutes, not 5 days, not 5 hours, 5 minutes to follow up. So that's a huge issue. Again, just some other data points that's been studied. Sales conversions are 391% higher if you get them in the first minute. Form fills, as I mentioned, need to be answered immediately. And 78% of customers broadly buy from the first person who follows up with them. So if they're calling 3 doctors' offices, they get yours, and yours is the one that responds, then that's where the business goes typically. Some more data on this similarly. If we look at this in terms of following up, again, this is more businessy, but the concepts apply. Think about addiction. Think about bariatric surgery or orthodontics or plastic surgery. Anywhere you have more of a consumer direct, high-end ticket competitive environment, you need someone to follow up and treat this as a sales process. It's not just a phone answering. You have to have somebody that actually follows up. And so here again, if you have a practice rep or a business developer, 81% these kinds of folks make less than 5 sales attempts or follow-ups, yet 7 or more attempts yields more conversions. Kathy, you want to speak to that or speak to the idea?
I wanted to I'm glad you got to that point because it's in the B2B space. I just remember years ago, a client reaching out. It looked like a little small, was it a clinical trial? And it ended up being a wonderful client for us. And his response was, "You called us back," because a lot of people didn't. So it makes a big difference. You'd be surprising how often people reach out and just don't get a response. So
Shocking.
yeah, it's going to put you at the front of the line if you just take the time to call back. So more on B2B and elective, as Stuart was saying. But
And then just again, the same theme again. In terms of following up, like what do people actually follow up in the world? Well, less than 1% are calling up in that first 5 minutes, and 57% can be later than a week. So again, these data, if you feel like this doesn't apply to your business, the same principle applies, guaranteed. Like I assure you, anything that you can make stronger here, overwhelmingly, the better you'll do. And these people, you've already spent all the money to get them to call you. Don't you want to take advantage of that? All right. So how do we improve besides the need for speed? What else can we do to improve? So this is one of my favorite slides that I teach to. This slide goes back years, but it's still true. So number one, get the theme that new patient inquiries are a top priority. It's absolutely vital. Show me something that's more important than getting the new patient. The objective is here. The key is whether it's on a form fill or a phone or whatever, the objective is not to inform, not to educate, not to tell them how nice you are. The objective is to get appointment. That's the person on the phone should recognize their goal is a first appointment. If you just do those two things, you'll do better. I mean, honestly, just two things, you'll do better. Remember that the best place to educate someone is to get them in the office. You educate in office, not on the phone. If you're still stuck with, taking patient calls at the front desk, like olden-timey offices that do that, on an office by office location, transfer it away from the busy front desk so somebody can spend time with the inquiry. If you're in a call center, many call centers prioritize. So they may have all the routine stuff goes one way, but the new patient inquiries goes to a special A team. So call centers, that's a really good strategy. Remember, after hours, depending on the specialty, are huge. That's often lost revenue, and almost nobody calls back on those, and those are really critical. Track the sources of the calls electronically, as we do with digital marketing, and also track your outcomes. Add math to this and reporting, and set your team up to succeed. That means things like, for example, not giving them too many competing tasks, training them, all the things that we're talking about here. Kathy, you want to speak to this slide?
yeah, so it's important that you look through the entire buyer's journey. The phone call is a very important first contact, but there's a lot of interfaces that happen throughout that scheduling all the way to the point of committing to treatment. So we want to look at when that inquiry was received, where it came in from. We might be converting more effectively from certain strategies or tactics or channels. So always keeping eyes on that on the front end. Whether or not we responded, how quickly we responded, who responded, whether or not we were able to reach that prospect, whether or not we were booked. If not, why not? What's the follow-up strategy? Did they come in for a consult? Was there a no-show? Was the procedure then booked as a result of that consult? If so, why? If not, why not? And then was the procedure completed, so that we can see the true life cycle of that opportunity, and that we're making sure we're optimizing each and every opportunity and seeing each of these touch points as a chance to win them and keep them for life, hopefully, and get them referring or lose the opportunity altogether.
By the way, as a time check, we're at about 3/4 of the hour. We have about a handful of slides left, and we will have time for Q&A. So that's coming right up. So stand by for that. So going back to call centers, I alluded to that earlier. And, when we work with multi-location businesses, in hospitals at various stages of starting. So we have some that are brand new and they're trying to think bigger. We have others with hundreds of locations or more. And we find that sophistication varies a lot here. Some really still send a lot of surprisingly large ones still use the front offices of each individual office. Like, you can do that. But most would agree, and anybody that's really more sophisticated, I find that all the more sophisticated businesses use call centers. It's just a way to scale. It's a way to manage. We have some of the advantages of a contact center over there. And by the way, we usually try to call them contact centers versus call centers because usually it's more than just phone calls. It could be text, it could be chat, it could be email, some center to take care of the people that are handling or inquiring. So, you can read all those things over on the right-hand side there. There's lots of advantages to call centers. But typically it's control and scaling are the ones that I think are the most important. That you're able to create processes. It's really hard to do that with individual people at a bunch of different offices. And so this is a big, big topic. How do you do it? Do you do it virtual? Do you it all do in a physical facility? Where do you do it? How do you handle issues like directions, for example? Like, how does the call center know how to give somebody directions on a location by location basis? This is a much deeper topic than we have time to go into today. I can just tell you these are all solvable issues. If you're interested, we have a blog slash podcast. We wrote about this with Kathy Divis, who's one of the leaders in contact center consulting. And so we work with Kathy. So if you're interested in this, we can talk to you about how to create a proper contact center. And it's a big deal. It's not a little deal, it's a big deal. And you want to do this right. We work with our clients to create contact centers periodically because it's a key linchpin to their business. So thinking about contact centers, again, if it's more multi-location businesses are far more complex. It's exponentially more complex than individual offices. We want to do the same stuff we've been talking about all the way through this, prioritize new patient inquiries, think about how do we respond to text, chat, self-scheduling, all these things. One impediment to contact centers are the politics. Typically, especially newer PPMs or DSOs, they have a bunch of individual doctor offices they've acquired, and they all feel like their scheduler is the only person they trust. And so they're going to push back hard on the contact center. But as a growing business, at some point, you're going to have to think about this. And again, if you're going to invest all this time and money, it's a bewildering labyrinth of decisions, technology wise, people wise, economic wise. I'm not a big, if I were building a contact center, for sure, I'd find an expert to help guide that. It's a great investment to the long-term growth of your business. Some scripting advice. This is very broad, of course, because we're talking about the generic case. This is just one of my favorites we talked about forever. Establish rapport, discover needs. We want to establish value. I'm so glad you called. Our doctors are fantastic, that kind of thing. We talk about dual alternative close. Okay, great. I can get you Monday morning or Tuesday afternoon, which would work better for you. That's a dual alternative close. Either is a yes. Answer objections, follow up, nurture if appropriate. I mean, there's a lot to this, right? More than I have time in a little webinar, but creating a script, creating a process is absolutely vital. But you notice here, it's not just a healthcare thing, it's also a communication thing and a sales thing to create this appropriately. This requires deep thought, process. This is too important. This is your business we're talking about, to let this just sort of evolve and let everybody freelance. Some last thoughts before I get into the Q&A. These are likely questions, so I'll jump to some of the questions we're probably going to get. Live chat. When live chat first came out, I loved the idea of it. I still think it's a cool idea. I wish I could say I have dozens of success stories. And most of the success stories I have, they're out there, but most of the response I get when people integrate live chat to their business, this includes us as a B2B company or B2C, is meh. In terms of sales, meh. Like, it's good for customer service potentially, but in healthcare, it's super complex anyway. You have to be careful what you say. And what we find is so often live chat just brings in people that, we're afraid to call. They're too early in the funnel. They're not really ready to buy anyway. So it's a meh. Kathy, you had a comment or a question?
I have a question. Someone just asked, for a clinic just starting out and not ready for a contact center, is there a tech stack you recommend?
I talked about that earlier. Just starting out, I don't think it's as important to have the tech stack. I think it's more important to train your people. And so there are, lots of different program providers out there. If you're interested in that more, you could email the number we have at the end of the webinar. We can kind of go down, give you some quick advice on that, more detailed. There's lots of different providers out there, though. They all, some of the good ones are more expensive than others.
Also,
There's
specialty. There's
yeah, yeah, it's by specialty. There's companies out there that often offer like a range of things. Like Solution Reach has like, sort of an email program to follow up, and it has scheduling. There's lots of different people out there. It really depends. But the focus, the tech is important for a smaller business, but for the larger ones, the tech, it's really important. But what's really important in every size business is what we're talking about today. How do you handle them? What's the strategy? Who's answering the phone? Why? How? All of that's really, really vital. Because we've been doing this for so long. We did this when we had a lot of smaller businesses with no tech stack. They still had to get the same things done. Be sure that everything is HIPAA compliant. I would say 50% of the prospective clients that call us, we just take a peek. Oops, by the way, did you know you're not compliant with your form? Little problem you might want to avoid. So make sure that that's all compliant. Any call recordings, forms, all that is HIPAA compliant. I mentioned self-scheduling is ideal. Don't try to send your patient inquiries through your regular patient portal. There's far too many hoops. People will bounce. It's a disaster at time and time again. I've had people insist on this. We have to prove it to them. We let a month go by. Nobody signs up. Okay, maybe that wasn't a good idea after all. Patient portals are designed for existing patients, not new inquiries. Kathy?
Yes, and then also be sure you have a follow-up strategy if they do not convert when these calls come through, which is another webinar in and of itself. But just make sure that you've got a tracking protocol established and that you've got some way of following up. If they called you, they have a need. If they didn't appoint, they're either dealing with the problem or going someplace else. So we want to catch them while that problem still persists, try to get them in.
So that actually goes to my next bullet. So when we were designing this webinar, we thought about talking about the case conversion process, the sales process. We chose not to do that because that varies so much by specialty, and there's just a million nuances there. So it didn't really fit this webinar. But if you're interested in more than that, for example, orthodontics or plastic surgery or anything where there's again, typically high dollars, more consumer direct, that conversion process or sales process is vital to your success. That would be a question for us offline, and we can see about training that, because that's a big deal. Like people, for example, in bariatric surgery often get there, they're not good at follow through, right? By definition. So you need to have a sales process that is thought of at every single step of the buyer journey. So it's like this we talked about today, squared, in terms of complexity and follow through. There are other services out there that specialize in this by niche that we could talk to you about as well. Like for example, MyMed Leads, Boost Bariatrics. There's a bunch of different things out there, but it's more than just software. It's like the whole system. So we need to think through that. Difficult to outsource answering services. So if you're trying to just send your inbound leads to answering services, that's almost always a failure. I've been looking for somebody that I could just blow this problem off and just take it away from the offices and send it to some fantastic call company to handle these inbound leads. It can be done, but I can just tell you after 20 years of doing this, I don't have somebody jumping to mind that I would refer. It's like I've seen some success, but it's usually mixed. It's really hard to delegate this vital function someplace else, even in someplace like addiction where it's highly specialized. There are firms that do this. A lot of our clients may use one of those services just for the late night calls because those inbound calls are just so important. So if you have a service, if you have an exception, I would love, to email me afterwards. We would love to just skip this whole thing and delegate it to a massive company. This is such an important issue. I've thought about creating my own call center, but I like what I do. It's just not our thing. So we want to make sure we teach our clients to handle this. And again, in my experience, it's just really difficult to outsource this vital function to another company. And then I highly recommend you call with proper HIPAA and disclosures. You record every inbound inquiry and analyze the results. Actually listen to them, analyze them, come up with solutions. That's yet another whole topic. There's even some call recording platforms out there now that can do that at scale for you. Kathy?
Yeah, there's another question from Neil. What do you consider the most important take-home message of this program? Telephone etiquette, access, follow-up, marketing, staff motivation, or contact center?
I would say there's nothing more important than a new patient inquiry. If you start with that premise, everything will fall into place. There's nothing more important than a new patient inquiry. So all those things matter, right? Like you have to take this seriously. This is a serious endeavor. And I just feel like it's so underestimated. This is not a sexy topic. I'd much rather be talking to you about, SEO or programmatic or, conversion rate optimization. The marketer in me loves that. But we chose to do this webinar because it's the linchpin to everything, and it has to be done well, and it has to be treated with the same care and expertise as everything else we do.
There are still people on the phones. So we can't, yes, there's a lot of ways to communicate online. Absolutely. And people like that, but you're still going to get phone calls. So it's just critical that we, can treat and convert each and every call to its full potential.
And the last thing here is that before we take additional questions, we've done a good job of answering a lot already. So maybe we've already satisfied everybody, but the consulting and staff training. So if you're interested in, a call center, or you're interested in someone training your team, these are things that we have different people on our team, both employed and also people we work with as partners. It's really unique to the situation. So I would suggest if you're interested in this sort of thing, to call us. Kathy probably would take this call because it's so specialized, and Kathy does this even more than me. To talk about what do you have? What's this current situation? Do you have a call center? How are you handling things? What are your objectives? And then we would typically work with you to come up with a solution on this. It's typically customized. We have different trainers that we think are better for different situations, different consultants. So it is pretty customized. It depends. I'm not selling you on this. I'm just telling you it's vital to success. Like this is not a big part of our business. It's something we do, not because it's a super profitable line. Sometimes I joke with Kathy, it's like swamp warfare. We go in to help a client and it's like we just start getting shot at and we get mosquito bites. So it's not an easy thing to solve, but again, there's nothing more important than that first patient call, and everything else falls apart if you don't have that into place. So here's our contact info. Most people just simply email us, or you can directly just go to, if you want to, Kathy at Healthcare Success. Just go straight to Kathy. Otherwise, the general number is info at. We're happy to answer questions about this. I hope this was valuable to you today. Kathy, do you have any additional questions as we wrap up here, or any additional thoughts from your standpoint?
Well, yeah, one additional thought. We have done extensive training, and one of the things that led to kind of in and around COVID was culture training. So also something to think about with your staff is your culture. And does everybody know what that is? So it goes back to your internal vibe and your mission statement and those kinds of things. It's important that people know what you stand for when they're communicating your unique value proposition on these phone calls.
I would just add one last comment. Going back to training and consulting, a lot of times it may be, depending if you're at a large business, to do a specialized program just to get your leadership on board with how important this is. So sometimes we get hired for that because there's a lot of stakeholders here. They have to understand it. So before you jump to worrying about how to train your staff, you may have to get internal alignment, and that's really, really important. Last thing, I do want to make the offer I referenced earlier. If you have access to call recordings, you can sign, can handle the paperwork and have us listen to a couple to make sure we're doing it, with HIPAA regulations. Better yet, what we typically do with new prospective clients is just simply, Kathy or somebody on our team can actually call a few of your offices and come back to you with a report. And so if you're interested in getting a mystery call, which is a little easier for non-clients, we usually do the call recording listening to current clients, but for prospective clients, and if you're interested in this in a deeper level and you're interested in maybe having us help you or in some way, we're happy to have a quick call or two to your staff and come back. Just my only advice is be sitting down on that second call.
People are shocked what's happening on their phones. It's amazing.
Again, a lot of times people use and then like what we'll do, oftentimes they ask us to do the mystery call. We have to get written permission from you to record the call when we do the mystery call, but they may use that mystery call to help, align the team and the management on the need for this problem. There's nothing like a real life call to their office to demonstrate this, and it's almost always terrible. Very rarely above a 5 on a scale of 10. So if you're interested in that, let us know. that would be a Kathy question or one of somebody else on our team to talk you through that. Okay, so it sounds like we answered all the questions today. Wow, time management, Kathy,
yeah.
exactly an hour. So we covered a whole lot of ground today on this very important topic. I want to thank you for listening and best wishes. Thank you, Kathy, for helping joining.
Thank you, Stuart.
See you. Bye.